She has worn the veil since she was 7 years old. Every girl in the realm dreams of the mating gathering. She has dreaded it her whole life. He walks past the daughters of lords, past the unveiled beauties, the offered smiles, the bare hopeful faces. He stops, in front of her, the veiled woman at the back of the room, the one no one wanted, the one everyone warned him about, and the question the whole hall is asking. The question she is asking, breath held, hands still. Is the Alpha King truly mad enough to claim what the world calls cursed? The hall smelled of beeswax and fear. Calla had learned young to tell the difference between the two. Fear had a sharper edge to it, something mineral and bright, like struck flint, and tonight it saturated the air of the mating hall of Valcrest the way heat saturates stone in summer, soaked in, slow to leave. Beeswax was gentler, older. The great iron chandeliers above had been burning since sundown, and their light came down amber and warm over the rows of presented women, over the lords and their retinues ranged along the gallery walls, over the red runner of carpet that led from the carved doors to the dais at the far end, where for now the dais stood empty. The Alpha King had not yet entered. Calla stood at the very back. This was not a sign to her. There were no assignments at a mating gathering. You came and you placed yourself, and the placement was its own declaration. The daughters of Liplebamsax arranged themselves near the front, their gowns pressed, and their faces bare and their chins lifted in the precise angle that suggested confidence without aggression, availability without desperation, a calculation worn on the body. She had watched them from the doorway before she entered, cataloging the small performances the way a woman might catalog exits. She was not performing, she was surviving. The veil was black silk gauze, fine enough that she could see through it, shapes, color, the broad strokes of the room, but heavy enough that what lay beneath was reduced to shadow. It fell from a coronet of dark iron set with small river pearls, a thing her mother had made for her when she was 7, and the decision had been made. The coronet sat against her hairline like a crown, like a cage. She had never been entirely sure which. Around her, the whispering had begun. It always began. She could not hear the specific words from here, not over the ambient sound of 200 people pretending not to stare at her. But she had heard the words before enough times that her body produced them without the need for sound. Cursed bloodline, moon-marked, hideous beneath the cloth, dangerous, unlucky to look upon. She had heard every variation. She had, at 15, catalogued them the way she catalogued exits. Useful information, nothing more. Because the moment any of it became something more than information was the moment it could hurt her, and she had decided a long time ago not to be hurt by things she could not change. Her hands were folded at her waist. She breathed. Her mother had brought her here. That was the part that still sat strangely, even now, 3 weeks after the summons and the packing and the long cart ride down from the eastern ridge. Her mother had brought her because the summons was compulsory. Every unmated woman of age within the pack realm was required to present at the gathering when the Alpha King called one. And because her mother, for all her protectiveness, for all the careful engineering of Calla's entire life around the veil and the hiding and the please don't let anyone see, was still the kind of woman who believed that rules were rules and that consequences for breaking them fell on the family. So Calla was here, presented, veiled and present, which was as close to participating as she had ever come in anything. She had told herself, on the road, that it would not matter. He would not see her. He would choose from among the bright and the bare and the beautiful, and Calla would stand at the back of the room and breathe through her mouth to keep the scents from overwhelming her. She had always been sensitive to scent, another feature of the bloodline no one would name, and then it would be over and she would go home. Simple. Survivable. The doors opened. He was taller than the rumors had suggested, and the rumors had suggested something considerable. Wolfram, Alpha King of the Valcrest pack realm, walked into the hall the way weather moves into a valley. You felt the pressure change before you saw the cause. He was broad through the shoulder in the way of men who had spent their adolescence doing hard work rather than practicing the graceful arts, and his hair was the particular brown-black that looks black in poor light and shows its warmth only in direct flame. He wore no crown. He wore a plain gray surcoat over dark wool, a sword at his hip that was not ornamental, and on his left jaw, visible even from the back of the room, even through her veil, a scar that traced the hinge of his jaw from ear to chin, a clean line, an old line, fully healed to silver. He did not smile, he scanned. That was the word for it. Not looked, not surveyed, scanned the way a man scans terrain for threat, quick and systematic, and already moving even as his eyes moved. He was already walking down the center of the hall before she fully registered that he had begun, and the women near the front straightened almost involuntarily. A single collective intake of breath, and he passed them. He walked past the daughter of Lord Brennan, who was considered the finest match in 3 generations, and who had, Calla had heard in the courtyard, practiced her curtsy for 2 months. He walked past the Aldrich twins, both unveiled and identically lovely, both with the precise chin angle of careful hope. He walked past a woman in gold, a woman in green, a woman whose hair had been arranged with what must have been hours of effort into something that caught the candlelight like hammered copper. He was still walking. Calla understood, distantly, that something unusual was happening. The whispers in the hall had changed pitch. Surprise carried higher than disdain, and the sound was now definitely the former. She watched him through her veil, through the shadow of the silk, watched him come down the long red runner, and not stop, still walking, and she thought with a kind of detached clarity, he is going to the dais after all. He is going to say something from the dais. There will be no claiming tonight, and a separate, smaller, more honest part of herself thought, good. Because if he had stopped at anyone else, she would have been relieved, and if he had stopped near her, she would have. She did not finish that thought. He stopped in front of her. The entire hall went silent. Not the hush of ceremony, but the silence of a room full of people all catching the same breath at the same moment. Wolfram, Alpha King of the Valcrest pack realm, stood 5 feet from Calla, and he looked at the veil, not through it, not past it, not at the suggestion of the face beneath. He looked at the veil itself, the black silk and the iron coronet, the river pearls her mother had sewn with shaking hands, and his expression did not change. He had gray eyes. She could see that even through the silk. Gray with something warmer underneath. Amber, maybe. The way a river stone shows gold only when it's wet. "Your name?" he said. His voice was low enough that the front rows almost certainly couldn't hear it. She could hear it perfectly. She said, "Cakla, of the Eastern Ridge. Calla." He said it back to her the way you say a word you want to remember, not testing it, keeping it. "How long have you worn the veil?" A strange question. She answered it honestly, because she couldn't think, quickly enough, of a reason not to. "Since I was 7. Something moved across his face. Not pity. She braced for pity, was ready to step back from pity. She had her whole body ready to step back, but it wasn't pity. It was something more careful than that. He nodded, once, the kind of nod that means I hear you and not I feel sorry for you, and she did not step back. "I will claim you," he said. "If you consent to be claimed." The room somehow got quieter. She hadn't thought that was possible. "You haven't seen my face," she said. "No, you don't know what's beneath the veil." "No." He said it the same way both times. Flat, factual, unbothered. "Do you consent?" She should have said no. That was the survivable answer. "No, my lord," and a curtsy, and the cart rode back to the Eastern Ridge and her mother's relief and her own complicated, swallowed, unspeakable relief. She knew what she was. She had always known what she was. She was the veiled woman, the hidden thing. The cursed bloodline in the back of the room that everyone whispered about and no one wanted. and the Alpha King standing in front of her was either mad or performing something for the court, or she didn't have a third option. She didn't have a way to explain this that ended anywhere good. She said, "Yes." She said it before she had finished deciding to. He reached out and took her hand, and the touch. His hand around hers, warm through her glove, his fingers longer than she'd expected. His grip careful rather than tight, sent something up her arm that was not warmth and was not cold, and did not have a name she was willing to give it yet. He turned to face the hall. "Witnessed," he said, loud enough for the room. The room breathed out, 100 sounds returning at once. Whispers. The shift of feet, somewhere near the front, a woman's sharp intake that might have been disappointment or might have been simple shock. Calla stood beside him and did not look at the faces turning toward her, and told herself that this was just another exit. Another way out of one room and into the next. She was very careful not to examine what she felt when he did not let go of her hand. The keep was called Ashford. It sat 3 hours north of Valcrest proper, up a road that climbed through pine forest until the trees thinned, and the sky opened and the keep appeared on a granite shelf above a river bend. Not grand, not imposing in the way of keeps built to make visitors feel small. It was functional, heavy stone and narrow windows, and a gate that was well maintained without being ostentatious, and the yard within was clean and practical. Stables to the left and a kitchen garden to the right, and a well at the center that had clearly been there since before anything else. Calla stepped out of the cart, and the scent hit her. Pine resin and cold water and wood smoke, and beneath all of it, something she was not going to name. He was waiting in the yard. He had ridden ahead. This was her own cart, her own possessions. The 2 women he had sent to attend her, and he stood by the well with his arms loose at his sides. In that particular way he had, she was already noticing, of occupying space without performing it. He didn't pose. He didn't arrange himself. He was simply there, and she was already learning that his simply there was more present than most men's deliberate attempts. "The east wing is yours," he said when she was close enough. "The connecting door between our chambers is bolted on your side. I won't request the bolt opened." She stopped a few feet from him. "Ever?" "The vow we made before the hall," he said, "was witnessed. You have a home here for as long as you want one. Safety. My name over yours. What I cannot offer you." He paused. Not for effect. He paused the way men pause when they're being very precise about something. "What I will not offer you is love. I am not. I have reasons for this that are my own. I am not asking you to understand them. I'm asking you to know what you have walked into." She looked at him through the veil. Through the silk she could see the scar along his jaw catch the afternoon light. The way it pulled slightly when he spoke. The way he did not look away from her veil, even when he clearly couldn't see her face through it. "I didn't come here for love," she said. "Good. I came here because the alternative was going home." Something shifted in his expression. Very small, very quick, something that might have been surprise or might have been something else entirely. "Then we understand each other." "We do." He nodded. He turned toward the keep door, stopped. "There's a library. 2nd floor, south end. The lock is broken, has been for 10 years. The steward keeps meaning to fix it. If you find yourself unable to sleep, it's warmer than the corridors." He said it to the gate, not to her, like it was information he was leaving behind him rather than offering. She said, "Thank you." He went inside. She stood in the yard for a moment in the pine and cold water air, and told herself that nothing had changed. She had a room with a bolt on her side of the door. She had a name over hers. She had the careful, specific promise of a man who had been very precise about what he was and was not. And that was survivable. That was more than she had walked in expecting. She touched the veil where it rested against her cheek. She went inside. The first week was a negotiation she hadn't expected. Not in words. Wolfram was not. She was learning, a man who negotiated in words if he could manage it. The negotiations happened in small adjustments, small concessions, the constant low-level translation of proximity. He ate breakfast before she came down. She learned this by the third morning. The evidence of it on the table. The pot still warm, the particular arrangement of what remained, and understood that he was giving her the morning room alone, because he had noticed, without comment, that she ate differently under the veil and preferred not to be observed managing it. He didn't say he had noticed, he simply wasn't there. She began leaving a section of the table for him on the fourth morning. He ate breakfast at the table on the fifth. He didn't comment on the change. She didn't either. They sat at opposite ends with a respectful distance between them and ate in the kind of silence that is not uncomfortable so much as careful, and she noticed that he drank tea with both hands wrapped around the cup the way you do when you've been cold for a long time, and the warmth is worth holding. The library's broken lock became a regular fact. She went there 4 nights in the first week, each time expecting solitude, each time finding him already there. Not waiting for her, she was fairly certain. He seemed genuinely surprised by her presence the first 2 times. Or at least as surprised as a man like Wolfram permitted himself to appear. He read standing up, which she found strange. He stood at the shelves with a book held open in one hand, and turned pages with the other, and did not sit unless he was going to be there for some time. She took the chair near the window. He stayed at the shelves. Neither of them suggested this arrangement. It simply happened, and by the third night it had the feeling of something established. "You read history?" she asked one night, because she had been watching him for several minutes in the dark Honey lamplight and had read nothing herself. He glanced at her. Tactics, mostly. Not the same. Closer than you'd think. He turned a page. "What do you read?" She had been reading A Natural History of Moon Cycles and their effects on pack realm flora, which was the sort of thing she had always read, secretly. For reasons she had never been able to explain to anyone without explaining other things first, she said, "Whatever's there." He accepted this the way he accepted most things she said. Completely, without needing more of it. But that night, when she came back to the library, there was a new book on the arm of her chair. A survey of celestial events across the last century, annotated in an older hand. She stood and looked at it for a long moment before she sat down. She did not ask him about it the next day. She did not need to. This was the negotiation. Small things, offered without ceremony, declined without offense. He had the fireplace in the great hall stoked every evening, and she had learned this meant. He thought the keep ran cold, and he would not say so. She had begun wearing an extra layer under her outer dress, and this was not because the keep was cold, but because she was from the eastern ridge, where winter lasted 7 months, and she had always run cold herself. But the result was that each of them was comfortable in the evenings, and neither of them had admitted to the other that they were tending to this small shared ease. He had a dog. She hadn't known the first week. The dog appeared on the 10th day, a large gray thing of indeterminate breed, old enough that its muzzle was white, and its movements were careful and dignified, with an expression of settled contentment that suggested it had long since made its peace with most things. The dog's name, she learned from the housekeeper, was Briar. Briar had apparently been at Ashford for 11 years, and was universally understood to be the dog's keep rather than the king's. Briar found Calla on her 11th morning. She was in the kitchen garden with a cup of tea she'd carried out, because the morning was clear and cold in the particular way of the north that she had always loved. The air like a held breath. Everything very still, and she heard the careful old dog footsteps on the path behind her, and turned to find Briar regarding her with the expression of a creature performing a thorough assessment. She crouched down and held out her hand, palm up. Briar sniffed her wrist for a long time, then sat down and leaned against her leg. Wolfram found them there when he came out of the kitchen door. 20 minutes later, Calla crouched in the garden path with her tea gone cold, and Briar still leaning on her with the settled air of something decided. He looked at them for a moment. She couldn't see his face well from this angle through the veil, but she thought, she was almost certain, that the line of his shoulders did something. Changed. Softened fractionally. In the specific place shoulders carry the weight they don't mention. "She doesn't do that," he said. "She's doing it now. I know." He looked at the dog. "She didn't do it with." He stopped. "She's particular. So am I," Calla said. He looked at her then, not at the veil, through it, trying to, the way she'd seen people do, the attempt to see what the silk was hiding. But this was different. He wasn't trying to see her face. He was trying to see something else. Something in the air between them that she couldn't name, and he apparently couldn't either, because after a moment, he stopped looking and went back inside without another word. She stayed in the garden. Briar stayed with her. She did not examine the particular warmth that had settled in her chest the way she examined everything else. She left it alone, she let it sit. It was, she told herself, simply the morning. The cold air and the good tea. Gone cold now, but still good, and the old gray dog leaning on her like a thing that had already decided. 3 weeks into her life at Ashford, she met the thing Wolfram was trying not to feel. Not in him, in herself. It happened in the corridor outside the library, 2 hours past midnight, when she had been unable to sleep. This was not unusual. She had never slept well. Another feature of the bloodline she did not discuss, and she had padded barefoot from her room, with a shawl pulled around her shoulders and her veil left on the bedside table. She always removed the veil in her room. In the library, if she arrived before him, she sometimes removed it in the dark. This was the closest thing she had to freedom, and she permitted herself it in private with a specific, deliberate care that had become its own ritual. She had forgotten he sometimes came to the library late. She turned the corner and he was there, also barefoot, also presumably unable to sleep, with an unlit candle in his hand that he must have forgotten to light and a look on his face that she had never seen on him before. Something open and tired and more honest than his daytime face, the way faces are in the dark when the performance has gone to bed. He saw her, not the veil, her. Calla went entirely still, one long breath of silence. He did not look away. She could feel, and this was not metaphor, this was literal, physical, a thing that happened in her body without her permission. She could feel his gaze on her face like warmth. Like the first moment of standing before a fire after a long, cold walk. She felt her heart make a sound she did not like because she liked it too much. She turned and walked back to her room. She did not run. She was careful not to run. She put the veil on in the dark and sat on the edge of her bed and pressed both hands flat against her thighs and breathed, very deliberately, in and out, and told herself that this was nothing. That it had been the surprise of it, only that. That she was not a woman who felt things in dark corridors about men who had told her explicitly what they would not be offering. She was very practiced at convincing herself of things. She was less practiced at succeeding. He knocked on her door in the morning. The connecting door, which she had opened by approximately 1 inch over the past 3 weeks, to allow the warmth from the great hearth in his chamber to pass through. She had told herself this was practical, and she was telling herself that. And his knock was very quiet, very specific. 2 taps. She said, "Yes, I owe you an apology," he said through the door. "The corridor last night. I should have made noise before I rounded the corner. I know you." He paused. "I know the veil matters. I'm sorry if I—" "You didn't," she said, a beat of silence. "I saw your face." Her hands tightened on the fabric of her skirt. "I know," she said. "I won't." He stopped again. Started again. "I won't speak of it to anyone. What I saw, that's yours, not mine to carry. I won't describe it. I won't reference it. I give you my word." She looked at the door. She was looking at the door the way you look at a thing you are not sure is safe to touch. My face, she said carefully, is not what the veil is for. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he had left. Then, I know. Do you? I know, he said again, that people have been afraid of something for so long they stopped questioning whether the fear made sense, and I know. She heard him shift slightly, the small sound of a large man adjusting his weight. I know that you have been carrying other people's fear as though it were your own. Calla did not speak. She sat on the edge of her bed with her hands flat on her thighs and did not speak for a long time. And through the inch gap in the connecting door, she could feel the warmth of the other room, the warmth he had not mentioned either, and she thought, this man is going to be the hardest thing I have ever survived. She thought it like a warning. She thought it like a fact. The midpoint of her life at Ashford arrived without ceremony, the way the most important things usually do. It was 43 days in, by her count. She had begun counting the way she had always counted things she was uncertain about. Not obsessively, not with dread, but carefully, the way you keep track of a wound to know whether it is healing or not. It was market day in the village 2 miles from the keep, and she had gone with Briar and one of her attendants. Nell, a practical woman of 50, with a flat Midland accent, and the particular skill of never asking questions she didn't need answers to. Because she had wanted, simply, to be somewhere other than the keep. To move through ordinary life with ordinary things happening around her. She did this sometimes, carefully, had done it her whole life. The veiled woman at the market, the veiled woman at the mill, the veiled woman moving through a world that occasionally stared but mostly, surprisingly, let her be. She heard the child before she saw her. A sound that wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite not. That specific, stifled, desperate quality of a child who has been told not to cry and is failing. Calla followed it without consciously deciding to, through the vegetable stalls and around the back of the butcher's cart, into the narrow space behind where a girl of perhaps 8 was crouched against the wheel with her face pressed into her knees. She crouched in front of her. The child looked up. Calla went very still. The child's face, on the left side, bore a mark. Silver white, like the trace of a healed scar, but not a scar. It ran from the corner of her left eye to the point of her jaw, and it caught the overcast mid-morning light in a way that made it look luminous. Alive. Like something lit from beneath. Calla had looked at her own face in a mirror exactly 4 times in her life. She recognized what she was looking at. "Who put you back here?" she said quietly. "My ma'am." The girl wiped her nose on her sleeve. "So the market people wouldn't see. And is this the market people's business?" The girl considered this. "She says it is. She says it makes trouble. She loves you," Calla said. "She's afraid for you. That's not the same as her being right." She sat fully down on the ground, unceremonious, her skirt spreading. Nell, making a quiet sound of resigned horror, behind her, and took off her glove. She held out her hand, which the child looked at, and then she tilted her wrist so that the inside faced up and slid the sleeve back an inch, and the light caught the silver-white mark on her own wrist, the small repeat of what was on the child's face, and the child's eyes went very wide. "You have it too," the child said. "I do, and it's." She was trying to ask something. Trying to ask whether it was all right, whether it ever got better. Whether Calla had managed to be a person anyway despite the thing that meant she had to hide behind a market cart. "Does it? It makes people afraid," Calla said. "Who don't understand what it is. And it makes you afraid, because they're afraid. But the mark itself." She paused. She had never said this to anyone. She had never been given the opening to say it. The mark itself is not the problem. What people decide it means, that's the problem. And what people decide things mean can change. The child looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "Your veil is pretty." Calla laughed. It surprised her. Came out before she could manage it into something smaller. "Thank you. I don't want a veil." "Then don't get one." She pulled her glove back on. "That's allowed." She found when she stood and turned back to the lane, that Wolfram was there. He was not supposed to be at the market. He had not mentioned the market. He was standing 10 feet away at the entrance to the narrow space with Briar beside him, and that look on his face. The open, tired, honest one. The midnight corridor one. The one that was not for public consumption, and that he had not yet noticed he was wearing. And Calla looked at him through her veil, and something happened in her chest that she had been very careful, for 43 days, not to let happen. She walked toward him. He stepped aside to let her pass, and as she came level with him, he said, very quietly, so that only she could hear, "What you just did. Don't." He went quiet. She walked past him into the lane, and Briar fell into step beside her, and she kept walking until she could breathe around whatever was sitting in her chest without it coming out of her face. She said later, in her head, to no one, in the kitchen garden in the last of the afternoon light, that she didn't need him to tell her she'd done something. She didn't need the witness. She had spent her whole life being invisible, and she had not, in the process, required anyone to observe her being decent. But the honest truth, the thing she was less careful about, in the kitchen garden, with the last of the light going gold, was that it had mattered. That he was there, that he had seen. She sat with that for a while. She let it be true. He found her in the library that night. This time she heard him coming. She had learned the particular sound of him, was learning it the way you learn the sounds of a new place until they stop waking you. His step heavier on the left, the slight drag of his right boot against stone, some old injury that had settled into habit. She knew she was learning him in ways she had not decided to. In the way you don't decide to know where the light falls in a room you've been in often enough. And she sat with this fact the same way she sat with the other fact, carefully and at a distance, as though proximity might change it. He came in and stopped when he saw her. "I keep finding you here," he said. "It's my library too now." He almost smiled. She was beginning to be able to read the almost smiles. The very slight shift in the right corner of his mouth, the scar on his jaw tensing just barely. "It's Briar's library, technically." "Where is she?" "Sleeping in my chair. I have been relocated." She gestured at the other chair. He sat. He picked up a book from the nearest shelf without looking at the title, a habit she recognized as not really reading, as needing to be in the room without having to justify being in the room. And she thought, we are both doing that. We are both sitting here doing the thing where you're somewhere because you want to be somewhere and you dress it in excuses. "What you said," she started, and then stopped. He waited. "In the market. What you were going to say." "I wasn't going to say anything useful," he said. "You were going to tell me it was a good thing I did." "Yes, you don't need to." "I know." He turned a page he hadn't read. "I know you don't need it. I wasn't doing it for you." She looked at him. "I was doing it," he said, "because I needed to say it. That's my problem, not yours." She was quiet for a moment. The fire moved. The library smelled of old paper and the pine resin that permeated the whole keep, and now, closer, the specific scent that she had been carefully not naming for 43 days. Something like wood smoke and cold stone, and, beneath that, something warmer. Something that was entirely him and nothing else, and that her blood recognized before her mind did, every time. "You have a reason," she said, "for the vow." He was quiet. "You don't have to tell me," she said. "I'm not asking you to. I'm just." She arranged her hands in her lap. "I have spent a long time being told that the thing about me that makes me difficult is a curse. I know what it is to live around a thing as though it's a wound when it might not be." I thought. "Perhaps. There's a prophecy," he said. She stopped. "In the old lineage records, specific to the Valcrest line." He set the book down. He was looking at his hands now. He did this when he was being very precise. She had noticed, looked at his hands as though they might help him be careful with the words. "The eldest son of each generation who bonds a mate and loves her." He paused. "The bond costs him. In some versions of the record, the cost is early death. In others, it's the loss of the alpha claim. My father believed it absolutely. My father, he stopped. She waited. My father's mate died when I was 11, he said. He believed it was the prophecy, that loving her had brought it. He spent the rest of his life certain of it. Another pause. He told me when I came of age that the only safe course was a bound mate, a kept vow, a partner but not a love. Someone to carry the line and hold the name, no more. The fire settled. A log shifted and resettled, and sent up a small column of sparks. And you believed him, Calla said. I believed him for a long time. He looked up from his hands. I'm finding it harder. She could feel, through all the careful distance she'd constructed, through the silk and the ritual and the 43 days of letting things be true only at a distance, she could feel the specific shape of the thing sitting between them in the library. What it was becoming. Wolfram. He looked at her. Why me? She said. At the mating hall, you walked past all of them. Why me? He was quiet for long enough that she thought again that he would not answer. Then he said, Your scent. Her breath went still. I smelled you, he said, before I was in the hall. The moment I came through the outer doors. His voice had dropped to the register it went to when he was being very honest, the one she had catalogued without meaning to. Everything else in that room, the candles, the crowds, the perfumes, all of it was noise. And you were. He stopped. Started again. You were the only clear thing. The only thing that made sense. And I walked toward you before I had decided to, which is... He stopped. She did not offer him the end of the sentence. She was not in a position to offer him the end of the sentence because she was using her entire attention to stay in the chair and breathe and not do something irreversible. Which is, she said, the bond. Yes, the bond we made before the hall. I think, he said carefully, it was made before that. The fire moved again, she said. The vow. Yes, the vow of no love. Yes, we both made it. Yes. His voice was very quiet now. We did. She stood up. She crossed to the fire and stood in front of it because she needed to move, needed the warmth against her front to balance the cold that was trying to creep up her spine. And she stood there and breathed and said, to the fire, I need you to not break it. A long silence. Calla, not tonight. She pressed her hands together in front of her. I need you to not break it tonight. I need. She stopped. She was going to say, I need to believe I am safe here, but she couldn't make herself say it, because the truest version of the thing she needed was something she had never said aloud, and was not going to say aloud tonight, in the library, by the fire, to the man who smelled like wood smoke and cold stone, and the one thing she had spent her whole life deciding she was not allowed to want. I need to be able to trust what you said. Another silence. Then, very quietly, all right. She did not look at him. Good night, Wolfram. Good night, Calla. She went to bed and lay awake until the sky outside her window began to lighten from black to the deep blue that comes before dawn. And she listened to the specific silence that meant the keep was sleeping, and she thought about prophecies and vows, and the fact that her blood had known him before she did, and she thought about a child behind a market cart with a silver mark on her face, and she thought about all the things she had been carrying that didn't belong to her. She didn't sleep, but it was a different kind of awake than the usual kind. Something in it had, very quietly, shifted. The men came on the 57th day, 3 of them, and a letter sealed with a crest she didn't recognize. She was in the east wing when they arrived. She heard the gate and then the voices, one of the voices Wolfram's, and not the one she'd learned but the other one. The one that didn't come with her, the one he wore outside the keep, and she stood in the corridor outside her door and listened to them cross the yard. She heard her own name. She went still. The girl with the moon mark, one of the voices said. Our Lord has been searching for the bloodline for 8 years. He asks only a conversation. You will leave, Wolfram said, within the quarter hour. My lord, The Lunark family claim is well documented. The moon-marked bloodlines owe allegiance. She owes nothing, Wolfram said, to anyone who was not there to protect her when she was 7 years old and being told to cover her face. Silence. Calla sat down on the floor in the corridor. She sat on the stone floor and pressed her back against the wall and listened to him, below in the yard. Tell 3 men representing someone powerful enough that their lord had been searching for 8 years, that they would be leaving and that they were not welcome back. In a voice that had no heat in it because it didn't need heat, in the voice of a man who is the authority in the room, so completely that anger would be redundant. She heard the gate close. She heard his step on the stairs. The heavier left, the slight drag of the right, and she should have been in her room. She should have not been sitting on the floor in the corridor outside her door, like a person who had forgotten what rooms were for. But she was still sitting there when he came up the last stair and turned and saw her. He stopped. He looked at her for a moment, through the veil, trying again to see whatever it was he was always trying to see, that wasn't her face. And then he came and sat down on the floor across from her, back against the opposite wall, with a matter-of-factness that made her want to laugh and also made her want to cry, and she did neither. "Who are they?" she said. "Collectors," he said, "of a kind. There are families, old ones, who have known for generations what the moon-marked bloodlines are, what they're capable of. Not feared, coveted. And what are we capable of?" He looked at her steadily. "You know." She did know. She had always known, in the way of knowing things you've never been told but have always felt true. The way the moonlight felt different to her than it did to other people. The warmth of it on her skin that was not just warmth. The way her mark had begun to glow faintly, only very faintly, on the nights of full moon, visible even through the veil as a faint luminescence, that she had always thought of as her body betraying her, and was beginning, slowly, to think of differently. The moon-marked were healers in the very old texts. More than healers. She had read the books from the library cellar shelves, the ones in the old script that she had learned to translate piece by piece, and she had found words like restore and renew, and in the oldest texts a phrase that came up again and again, the ones who hold the light. "The prophecy," she said. He looked at her. "Your prophecy, the one that says loving your mate will cost you. Yes." "What if," she said carefully, "the prophecy was written by someone who didn't understand the bloodline? Who knew that the Alpha King's mate would be moon-marked? That the bond between your line and mine has been there since the beginning? That's in the old texts, too. Your advisors either haven't found them or haven't told you. And who knew that the moon-marked mark costs something and who didn't know?" She stopped. Rearranged. What if they saw what was real and described it wrong? He was very still. "The mark," she said, "my mark. On the nights of full moon she touched her veil. It takes light in, and it gives something back. I have never been able to measure it. I have never been able to ask anyone who understood it, but I have never." She pressed her hands together. "I have never been in a room with someone who was very ill and not felt it. Not felt the pull of it, like a current. I always thought it was. I always thought it was just the curse, the thing the bloodline does. But what if the cost the prophecy describes is just? The cost of the gift," he said. She looked at him. He had gone very quiet. Not the waiting quiet, but a different kind. The kind of quiet that comes when something you've been holding at arm's length comes close enough to touch, and you are choosing, very carefully, how to respond to that. "My mother," he said. "She was ill, for years before she died, not suddenly. The way the prophecy suggested, a blow, a cost exacted, but slowly, and I thought." He stopped. "My father thought it was the bond, that his loving her was drawing something out of her. But if she was moon-marked, was she?" He was quiet for a very long time. "There was a veil," he said, "in her portrait. I always thought it was fashion. Old custom." He looked at the floor. "I never." She waited. "She was giving light," he said. She was giving what the bloodline gives, and it cost her. Not because he loved her. Because she was. He stopped, because she was using it, and no one knew to help her manage it. No one knew what it was. The corridor was very quiet. The prophecy was a bad translation, he said. Probably, she said. He looked at her then, really at her, through the veil, with the full weight of his attention. And she felt it the way she felt the moonlight, the warmth and the recognition of it, her blood knowing before her mind did, the same way it had in the mating hall when he stopped in front of her, and she had said yes before she decided to. I have been afraid of a mistranslation, he said, for 32 years. I have been wearing a veil, she said, for 18. He didn't say anything. The fire at the end of the corridor made a sound in the silence. Wolfram. She said his name the way she'd heard him say hers that first night, in the hall, like something she was keeping. I need you to tell me something. Yes, the vow we made. His jaw set slightly. The scar tensed. Yes, if you needed to break it, she said, what would stop you? A very long silence. I made it, he said, because I was afraid. He said it in the flattest, most factual voice, the same voice he'd said no with in the mating hall, steady and without performance, and I am still afraid. I want to be honest with you about that. I am still afraid of it. The cost, what I might take from you without meaning to, what my needing you might. Ask me, she said. He looked at her. Ask me whether I can bear it. Don't decide for me. His throat moved. Can you? He said. She thought of the child in the market and the silver mark on her face and what Calla had said, that what people decide things mean can change. She thought of 43 days of a library and a broken lock and teacups, with both hands and an old gray dog, who had leaned against her leg and decided. She thought of the corridor last night with no veil in the dark, his face in the unlit space, the look on it. Yes, she said. He reached across the stone floor and took her hand. Neither of them said anything else. The keep was very quiet, and the fire moved at the end of the corridor, and Briar's claws made a sound somewhere below that meant she was relocating herself in her sleep, and Calla sat on the cold stone floor of a keep that had been becoming a home without her permission, and felt, very precisely, the specific weight of a hand wrapped around hers that meant, I am not letting go. She let her head rest back against the wall. She breathed. For the first time in 57 days, she did not count anything. They came back. Not the same 3 men. Cleverer this time. More of them. Arriving in the blue dark before dawn, on the 61st day, when the keep was at its quietest, and the gate guard was 1 man instead of 3. And the plan was clearly to move fast, and not announce intention until the intention had already been accomplished. She woke to Wolfram's voice at her door, the connecting door. 2 sharp knocks. She was up before she was fully awake, veil pulled on by habit, shawl over her shoulders, door opened. He was dressed. Had he slept? She didn't know. She couldn't tell. With his sword already at his hip and his face doing the version of still that meant something was happening that required him to be very controlled. They've come through the north postern, he said. 6, maybe 8. Nell is taking you to the cellar passage. No, she said. He stopped. I am not, she said with a calm that surprised her, going into a passage. Not for this. Calla, what do they want? You, the bloodline. Specifically, he set his jaw. Specifically for healing purposes. One of their lord's family is ill. Dying, apparently. They want you to use the mark. She stood in the doorway between their rooms and thought about this. Then I'll go speak to them, she said. Absolutely. Wolfram. She said his name in the particular way she'd developed, the one that meant, I am not an argument you are going to win, not because I am being difficult, but because I have thought about this more carefully than you have in the last 10 seconds. They want something I might be able to provide. They're afraid and desperate, and they came before dawn because they knew you'd say no. That's not. She stopped. That's not evil. That's people who don't know how to ask. He looked at her for a long moment. I can't protect you, he said, if you're between me and them. Then stand beside me, she said, not in front. Another long moment. He stepped aside. She went down the stairs. The main yard was lit by 3 torches, and 6 men she didn't know, with the tense, coiled quality of people who had expected resistance and were recalibrating. Their leader was a large man with the look of someone who had been given bad news repeatedly and was still not accepting it. Jaw set, eyes hard, hands not yet on weapons but near them. He saw her and recalibrated again. The moon marked, he said. My name, she said, is Calla. A beat of silence. She could feel Wolfram 3 paces behind her, which was closer than beside, and she chose not to correct this. Your lord's family, she said. Tell me about them. The large man, his name, she learned over the next hour, was Bren, had a daughter of 11 with a wasting illness that the healers had been unable to stop. He had been told 6 months ago by an old scholar who had been studying the moon-marked bloodlines in the archived texts that there was something the marked ones could do for the dying. He had not known how to find one. He had been told about her. She sat down on the mounting block in the center of the yard, which was not dignified but was the most practical seat available, and she listened to all of it. Then she said, I don't know if I can help her. I have never been trained. I don't know the full scope of what the mark does, and I have been taught, my entire life, that it does nothing but make me monstrous. So I want to be honest with you about that. Bren looked at her. But I can try, she said. If you ask me correctly. A very long silence. Bren, 6'2" and built like someone who had never been obliged to ask for anything in his life, looked at the woman on the mounting block with the black silk veil and the iron coronet with the river pearls, and he said, Will you try? Yes, she said. Wolfram made a sound behind her that she filed away to examine later. She couldn't leave the keep that night. The light wasn't right. The mark responded to moonlight. She needed the next full moon, which was 9 days away. She explained this to Bren with a specificity that seemed to surprise him, as though he hadn't expected her to understand her own bloodline, and she understood this and tried not to hold it against him because he had also driven 8 hours in the dark for a dying child. He and his men stayed. The keep absorbed them with the particular efficiency of a household that knows how to manage the unexpected, and Wolfram moved through this with a contained displeasure that expressed itself primarily in the set of his shoulders, and the way he positioned himself whenever she and Bren were in the same room, which was always slightly too close to be coincidental. You're hovering, she told him, on the 3rd evening in the library. I'm present, he said. You're between me and the door. The door leads to the corridor where Bren's men, Wolfram. He stopped. She looked at him through the veil. He looked at the veil through which he could not see her. This was the dynamic, and she had come to understand it as a kind of intimacy. He was always looking for her through the silk, always trying to find the angle that let him see something, and she was always feeling that attempt as warmth. I trust you, she said. I need you to trust me. He was quiet for a long time. That's harder, he said. I know, not because of you. He looked at the floor, at his hands, because trusting you means. It means I can't. He stopped. Tried again. If I trust you, then I am also trusting that you'll come back from whatever you walk toward. And I have found that I am. He pressed his lips together. I am not comfortable with that. She looked at him. Wolfram. Yes. Say the rest of it. A long silence. I love you, he said. He said it like a fact. Like the same voice that had said no and yes, and your name in the mating hall. Flat and steady and without performance. The voice of a man making a precise statement about something that was true. He didn't look up from the floor when he said it, and he didn't look up after. She sat very still. The vow, she said. I know. We both made it. I know. He finally looked up, his gray eyes in the lamplight, the amber underneath. I knew it was. I knew it was breaking before I could stop it. It's been breaking since the 5th morning when you left half the table for me and I. He stopped. It's been breaking since the garden, with Briar. It broke completely on the floor of the corridor, and I have been trying to honor what you asked me in the library, the first time. Not tonight. Not until you were ready. Her throat was tight. Are you ready? He said. I don't know, she said. That's all right. It might not be fixable, she said. The vow, once broken, Calla. She stopped. I don't want to fix it, he said. She pressed both hands flat on her knees. The fire moved. Briar, at the foot of his chair, made a small sound in her sleep and resettled. I have worn a veil for 18 years, she said. Because the world told me I was something to be hidden. Because my mother loved me and was afraid for me and made me small to keep me safe, and I let her because I was 7 and then I was older and the small had become habit and I didn't. She stopped. I didn't know how to be otherwise. He waited. I came to your mating hall, she said. To survive it, to get through it and go home and call that enough. And you stopped in front of me, and I said yes before I decided to, and I have been. She pressed her hands harder against her knees. I have been trying to survive you. To get through you and come out the other side and call that enough. And, he said. And, she said. I don't think enough is the word anymore. He stood up. She stood up. They were across the library from each other, which was perhaps 8 feet, and she was aware in the specific way she'd been aware of him since the mating hall, her blood before her mind, her body before her decision, of the 8 feet closing. He stopped in front of her. He raised one hand and held it up between them, palm facing her, not reaching. Offering. Take it, he said, or don't. Whatever you decide. She looked at his hand, at the scar on his jaw that caught the lamplight, at his eyes, gray and amber, looking for her through the silk. She put her hand in his. He closed his fingers around it. Neither of them moved for a long moment, and the fire moved, and Briar slept, and the library smelled of pine resin and old paper, and the specific thing she had been refusing to name for 57 days, and she stood in it and breathed, very deliberately in and out, and felt the particular warmth of his hand around hers without trying to keep it at a distance. She didn't keep it at a distance. She let it be close. The full moon rose on the 9th day like something coming home. Calla felt it before she saw it. Felt it the way she always had. The familiar warmth that started at her wrist and spread upward. The mark responding to the light before the light was visible, like a thing anticipating. She had spent the 9 days reading everything in the library's cellar shelves that she could find. Every text about the moon-marked bloodlines. Every reference to what the gift involved, and what it cost, and how to manage the cost. Wolfram had sat across from her every evening while she read, and had not asked her to explain, and had brought her tea without commenting on it, and had, on the 7th day, arrived in the library with 3 additional books he had sent a rider to retrieve from a scholar in Valcrest proper. She had looked at him when he put them on the table. The rider was fast, he said. He said it to the bookshelves. She said, "Thank you." He said, "The tea's going cold." She drank it warm. On the 9th night, she went to the small room they'd prepared at the back of the keep, a private space. Bren's daughter brought in and settled on a clean pallet, Bren himself outside the door, because Calla had told him that having a frightened parent watching would not help anyone, and she sat beside the child. Her name was Mira. She had brown hair and a stubborn set to her mouth that suggested she was very much her father's daughter, and she was thin in the way of children, who have been ill a long time. But her eyes were still bright and present, and she looked at Calla's veil with the honest curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to perform disinterest. "What's under it?" Mira said. "Something I'm still learning not to be afraid of," Calla said. Mira nodded, satisfied by the honesty. The moon came through the window. It fell on the pallet, on Mira's face, on Calla's veil, and Calla felt it hit the mark on her face like the first note of something, like a door opening. And she placed one hand very carefully on the child's wrist. "What happened in that room?" She told Wolfram about later in pieces, never all at once. It was not the kind of thing that translated to a single telling. The warmth of it. The pull, the current she had always felt without understanding it. The way the mark had always taken in light and held it, and she had always thought that was where it ended. The holding, and now understanding that the holding was just the preparation. The giving. The way the warmth moved down her arm and through her palm and into the child's wrist, and Mira's breathing shifted, deepened, something releasing. She did not know how long she sat there. The moon moved. When she came back to herself fully, Mira was asleep. Properly asleep, the loose and heavy sleep of a body doing something restorative. Her breathing was even and slow. Calla sat back. She was very tired. Not drained. Not the desperate, hollow tired she had feared from the old texts, the descriptions of overuse. But the specific, satisfied tired of having done something that mattered with her whole body. She went to the door. Wolfram was in the corridor. He had apparently sent Bren to the kitchen, wise, she thought, giving the man something to do, and was standing with his back against the wall the way he'd sat on the floor that night, without performance, simply present. He looked at her when she came out. She did not say anything. He pushed off the wall and crossed the 2 steps between them and put his arms around her, and she let him. She stood in the circle of his arms with her veil pressed against his shoulder and his hands warm across her back, and she closed her eyes and was very still and breathed and let herself be held. She had not been held in. She could not count the years. She was not going to try to count them tonight. His chin came down against the top of her head. "All right?" he said. "Yes," she said. "The girl? I think so. She'll need to sleep. Then we'll let her." She felt his chest rise and fall. The warmth of him. The specific scent, wood smoke and stone in the warm under. That which was entirely him, which her blood had recognized in a mating hall full of strangers, which she had been very careful not to name, and was done being careful about. She said into his shoulder, "Wolfram, yes." The vow. "Yes. I'm breaking it." A pause. Then, very quietly, she felt him laugh. Not an amused laugh, but the laugh of relief, the kind that comes when something you've been braced against releases. "It's been broken," he said, "for a while now." "I know," she said. "I know it has. I just wanted to say it." He tightened his arms around her. She let him. In the morning, Mira ate breakfast and declared it insufficient and asked for more, which Nell supplied with a flat midland practicality that suggested she had always known it would come to this. Bren stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at his daughter eating and did not say anything for a very long time, and then he said to Calla, who was sitting at the table with a cup of tea, "What do I owe you?" "Nothing," Calla said. "That's not." "Go home," she said. "Take your daughter home. And if you find other Moonmark children, hiding veiled, told they are cursed, send them to me." Bren looked at her. "I'll be here," she said. He left that afternoon. Mira from the cart window waved at Briar. Briar sat in the yard with the settled dignity of a creature who did not wave back but appreciated the sentiment. Wolfram came to stand beside Calla as the cart disappeared around the pine road. "Send them to you," he said. "Yes. You're planning to stay then." She looked at him. He was looking at the road, a slight tension in the scar along his jaw, and she recognized what this was. He was trying not to ask the thing he needed to ask. He was trying to be careful with it the way he was careful with most things he needed, holding them at arm's length until he decided whether to hold them at all. "Wolfram," she said. "Yes, ask me." He looked at her. "Will you stay?" "Yes," she said. He breathed out. "Yes." She said again, simply, because it wanted to be said again. The veil came off on the first full moon after that. Not with ceremony. She had not planned ceremony. She had planned to do it alone, in her room, where she'd done everything alone for 18 years. And she had been sitting in front of the small mirror on her dressing table with the iron coronet in her hands, and the veil off already, looking at herself. Really looking, for the 5th time in her life, and she heard 2 quiet knocks on the connecting door. She said, "Yes." He opened the door and stood in it and looked at her. She did not look away. The mark on her face, the left side, from the outer corner of her eye to the line of her jaw, was lit. It was full moon, and it was lit, and it was silver white and luminous, and it made the left side of her face look like something illuminated from within, like a window, like a door, like something that had been waiting to be seen for a very long time. She sat in front of the mirror and looked at him looking at her. His expression was the midnight corridor one, the open one, the one that was not for public consumption, and that he had stopped trying to keep from her. "You told me," she said, "in the library once that you imagined my face, how you thought it might look." "Yes. Were you close?" He looked at her for a long moment, at the mark and the face around it and the eyes that were waiting for whatever he was going to say. "No," he said. She braced. "Gentler," he said. "I imagined it gentler than it is, more careful. Less," he stopped, "less like something that has survived something and knows it." She felt the breath go out of her. "You're more," he said, "than I imagined. I want to be honest with you about that, too." She turned from the mirror to face him directly. He was in the doorway. The inch gap had become a door. He stood in it with the lamplight of his room behind him and the moonlight of hers in front, and the scar on his jaw and the gray amber eyes and the particular way he held his weight that she had learned in 57 days. And however many days after, she stood up. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him without touching, and she looked up at him, and he looked down at her, and his hand came up, very slowly, and he held it the same way he had in the library, palm toward her, not reaching. Offering, she leaned into it. His palm cupped her face, the right side, the unmarked side, and she felt his thumb move across her cheekbone with a care so specific it made her close her eyes. "Calla," he said. "Yes," she said. He kissed her forehead. That was all. His lips against her forehead, her face in his hand, the moonlight of the room and the lamplight of his, and she stood in the doorway between them and let it be enough, which it was more than, which was the whole thing she had been trying to learn since she was 7 years old, and being told that the thing that made her different made her wrong. The door between their rooms stayed open. The mornings took on a different quality after that. She still went down before him sometimes, and he still appeared to have eaten before her sometimes, and neither of them commented on these continued small negotiations of space and habit. But the library was different in the evenings. She sat in her chair, and he sat in his, and Briar slept at his feet, and the fire moved and they talked, properly, without the careful distances they'd been maintaining. She told him about the Eastern Ridge and the 7 winters. She'd counted by the snow depth on the windowsill, and her mother's iron coronet, and the 4 times she'd looked in a mirror. He told her about the prophecy records in his father's hand and the portrait with the veil, and 11 years old, the morning his mother didn't wake, the scars on his jaw from a training accident at 15, that he'd refused to let the healer close properly, because the pain had felt, at the time, like the thing he deserved. She had looked at the scar when he said that. "You didn't," she said. "I know," he said. Now, she reached across and pressed 2 fingers to the silver line of it, very lightly. He went entirely still. "You were 15, she said. "Yes." "And frightened." "Yes. And there was no one to tell you that the thing you were afraid of wasn't what you thought it was." A long silence. "No," he said, "there wasn't." She kept her fingers on the scar. After a while, she moved them away. He caught her hand before she could, held it for a moment, then set it back in her lap, with a care that said more than he'd probably intended. "Thank you," she said. "The tea's going cold." He drank it warm. The Moonmark children began arriving in the spring. Not many. 3 in the first month, 2 more in the second. Word traveled the way word of hope always travels, quietly, And then suddenly, through the networks of women who knew, women who had been hiding daughters, and needed somewhere to send them where the hiding would stop, Calla built what she built carefully, with Wolfram's resources and without his direction. He had made it clear once that it was hers to build, and he had not offered opinions after. Though he did build a small additional wing on the east side of the keep without explaining what it was for, and she had come out one afternoon to find him directing the stonemasons with a particular attention to the dimensions of the windows, making them large. "More light," she said, when he came in for supper. "For whatever you need," he said. The table was full by summer. Not always, not every night, but often enough that Nell had begun making bread by feel, the amount of it without counting. 3 of the children were old enough to help in the kitchen garden, which they did with the enthusiastic inefficiency of people who had recently been given permission to be somewhere instead of hidden from it. Briar supervised from the garden wall with ancient dignity. Calla watched them from the kitchen door. She was not wearing the veil. She wore it into the village stills, sometimes by preference, not out of shame. She had understood the distinction now, not out of shame, but out of the desire to have something that was private. She had come to think of the veil as a door that she could choose to open or close, rather than a door that had been locked from outside, and this was a different thing entirely. She was wearing the iron coronet, not with the veil, just the coronet. Her mother's made thing, the river pearls her mother had sewn with shaking hands. She had thought for a long time that she would put it away when the veil came off. She had found that she didn't want to. Her mother had made it out of love, out of fear, out of the only way she'd known to protect a thing she loved. And the love underneath all the wrong decisions was still the love, and Calla had decided she was keeping it. Wolfram came to stand behind her. She felt him before she heard him. Warmth at her back, the particular scent. And he stood close enough that she could feel his breath against her hair, and his hands came around her from behind and settled against her waist. Loose and present, she watched the children in the garden. "The one with the red hair," she said. "She's been here 6 weeks, and she still flinches when someone comes up behind her quickly. I know. She'll stop. I know." He pressed his lips to the top of her head, brief and unhurried. "You did." She leaned back against him. The sun was doing something in the garden. Late afternoon, the angle going low and golden, the light that makes everything look like it's being remembered even while it's happening. Briar shifted on the wall. The children argued about something in the vegetable beds with the genial intensity of children who have recently been given permission to argue about things out loud. "Wolfram," she said. "Yes, the vow. Which one?" She smiled. She felt him feel it, the slight shift of her against him. "The one we made before the hall. Well and thoroughly broken," he said. Both of us, he agreed. She was quiet for a moment. "Was it the right thing?" she said. "To break it." He turned her gently to face him. She looked up at him in the afternoon light, at the scar and the gray amber eyes, at the face she had been learning for seasons now and still found new things in. His hand came up to her face, the same way it always did. The right side, the unmarked side, first, and then, and this was the part that still undid her every time, moving to the left side, too, the marked side, the silver-white, luminous part of her that the world had called cursed for 18 years. And cupping both sides equally and with the same care. "Yes," he said. She put her hands against his chest. Behind her, the children were still arguing. Briar had apparently decided to weigh in from the garden wall. Nell's voice came from somewhere in the kitchen, doing the very specific thing Nell's voice did when she was pleased about something and expressing it as practicality. Wolfram looked at her in the late light of a keep that had become a home. "Yes," he said again, because it wanted saying again. She closed her eyes and let herself be held in it, the warmth of the garden, the weight of his hands on her face, the ordinary, extraordinary sound of a yard full of life, And she thought about a girl of 7 being given a veil to hide a light that no one had known how to name. She thought about the thing you hide to be safe. She thought about free. She wore the coronet to the high feast that winter, the first time she'd attended Valcrest proper as Wolfram's claimed mate, and she walked into the feast hall unveiled with the river pearls at her hairline and the mark lit silver white in the hall's many candles, and she walked straight and did not flinch. There were whispers. There were always whispers. She breathed through them the way she'd learned to breathe through everything. Not suppressing them. Not pretending they weren't there. Just letting them be the weather and not the verdict. Wolfram walked beside her. Not in front, not behind. At one point, deep into the hall, someone, she couldn't see who, said the word in the old pack tongue that meant moonmark. The fearful word. The one she'd heard her whole life. One of the children from the keep's east wing, standing 3 places to her left, heard it too. She was 12, small for 12, with the mark running from her right temple to her ear. She heard the word and her face closed like a shutter. Calla said, loud enough for the 3 nearest tables to hear, "That word describes a bloodline older than this hall, older than this pack realm. If you're using it to frighten someone, I'd like to know why you're afraid of something older and wiser than yourself." A silence. Then the child with the right temple mark looked up at her. Calla looked back. She did not smile. This was not a smiling moment, this was a witnessing moment. She held the child's gaze steadily, and what she was saying with it was, "I see you. You are here. This is allowed." The child straightened, very slightly. Half an inch. It was enough. The keep settled into winter with its particular northern comfort. The big hearths going round the clock. The smell of pine and wood smoke thick in every room. The early dark that Calla had once experienced as confinement and had found over the course of a year to be a thing she loved. The quality of the dark at Ashford was different from anywhere else. Warm, specific. She had a word for it now, hers. On the night of the winter solstice, the longest night, she went to the garden. She didn't tell anyone. She simply went, barefaced, no veil, the iron coronet because she always wore it, her heaviest wool cloak, because the night was deep cold and clear, and the stars were very close and sharp. She stood in the garden where she had met Briar, and where she had watched the children in the summer, and where Wolfram had built windows to let in more light, and she turned her face up to the sky. The mark lit, not moonlight. The moon was a thin crescent tonight, just enough. But the stars had their own effect, quieter, like a hum compared to the full moon song, and the mark responded to it, warmed and lit and sent the silver-white luminance across her face and into the dark around her. She stood in it. She did not try to make herself small. She heard his step on the path, the heavier left, the slight drag, and she did not turn around. He came and stood behind her, put his hands at her waist, looked up with her at the winter sky. "How long have you been out here?" he said. "A while. Nell says you didn't take gloves." "I forgot." He reached around and took her bare hands in his gloved ones, which was thoroughly impractical and thoroughly warm, and she felt his chin against her hair. "Calla." "Yes, I love you." She'd heard it before, from him. He had said it 7 times since the library. She had counted without meaning to, each time the same voice, flat and steady and certain. She had said it back 5 of the 7 times, and the 2 times she hadn't said it back, she had done something instead, had turned toward him and put her hand flat on his chest, and left it there until he nodded, and he understood this, which was one of the things. Tonight she said it back. "I love you," she said, to the winter stars over Ashford, to the garden that was hers, to the keep that was hers, to the mark on her face that was hers and always had been, and that no one, not her mother's fear, not the world's whispers, not her own careful distances, had ever taken from her, though they had all tried to make her take it from herself. He held her hands tighter. The stars moved. The mark glowed. The winter air was cold and clear, and the keep behind them held its warmth and its fires and its east wing windows and its full table and its old gray dog, who had decided, a long time ago, which things were worth leaning into. She breathed. She did not count anything. She stood in the cold garden with her face turned up and the light of her going out into the dark, unhidden, unashamed, given freely into the night air of a place that had become a home, and she thought. She did not name it. She didn't need to name it. It was in her chest and her hands and the warmth of him behind her and the particular weight of the coronet at her hairline, she thought. This, exactly, this is what the veil was keeping. Thank you for spending this evening here, in Wolfram's quiet keep and Calla's quiet courage. She stayed longer than she meant to, and so did he, and so did we. If stories like this one call to you, the ones about the kept vow finally broken, the hidden thing finally seen, the most dangerous man in the room going soft and certain for one woman, come back. There are more. There is always one more story, waiting in the dark like a held lamp, ready to be lit